beginning of what's known as Paul's journeys today. I really wanted to read the whole chapter, but I knew that probably wasn't going to work, and we could really lead the next 4 or 5 chapters and really still not get the entirety of all the journeys that Paul went on. But Paul endured a lot of things along his journeys. He did a lot of traveling. He traveled over 10,000 miles, and along the way he faced a lot of hardships, a lot of difficulties. And I'm going to relate that story, the story of Paul today, to a vacation, and really in a bigger context, your life journey today. That's what I want to do, is tie all 3 of those together. And if we think about a journey as a vacation, or vacation as a journey, we know that when we go on vacation, oftentimes things don't go quite as planned. Sometimes the best laid plans fall apart. And so I have some examples of vacations falling apart. The first one now, on the left side of your screen, you know that when we go on vacation, especially as men, we want to do things that we've never been able to do before. We want to jump right out there and grab that. Maybe we want to have a little contact with nature, and well, what generally happens is what's on the right, you end up in the emergency room, and the emergency room's no fun place to be on vacation. Next is sometimes we have car troubles. Hopefully not to this extent, but if you're driving, you know, you can have flat tires, your car can break down. If you're trying to rent a car, the reservations get mixed up. So we can have car troubles on vacation. Oh yeah. Has this ever happened to anybody on vacation? You go to far off lands, exotic places, or maybe even you just stay local and you decide that you can drink more than you really can, or you eat something that doesn't agree with you and you end up sick. I think, Cheryl, you have a story about your sister, was it? You went Bahamas or something and she ended up sick, or was that you? Oh, Cheryl ended up sick as a kid her entire vacation. So that's no fun. Oh yeah, cranky kids. You travel 1,000 miles to see the mouse, and the mouse scares your child and they don't want to do anything but go home. And sometimes parents get cranky too, but I didn't throw a picture of that in there. That's a lot uglier. Cranky kids, oh yeah, you lose your luggage. This is why you lose your luggage. Because this is what the guy at the airport's doing. They're having competitions. I can throw that suitcase farther than you can. Trust me, it's no fun to end up without your luggage. I ended up on a business trip in Ohio with nothing but the clothes I had on for 3 days. Not a fun thing. And finally is airline delays. Airline delays. You know, you schedule everything just within minutes of each other. It gets delayed, it gets messed up, and you spend 3 days in the airport with 3,000 of your crankiest and usually worst smelling friends. But you know what? Even with all of that, even though I'll bet if every one of us thinks back at whatever vacation we've taken, you can always pull out that negative thing. Something negative usually happens when you're on vacation. But even with all of that, there's always this one gem of goodness that occurs. Now, most of the time you can't see that till after the fact. But there's always just this one moment that you remember when you're on vacation, and that's what draws you to go back again next year, even though you probably shouldn't. It's like a golfer who shoots 17 3/4 of the worst holes ever, and then they hit that one shot, and you go back again. Well, today I really want to focus in on that one gem of happiness in your journey. I really want you to focus on the positive, and believe it or not, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to look at the negative. Because with every negative comes something positive, and perhaps there's no story that really exemplifies that more than Paul's story. Paul went through so much negative, and yet he ended up with nothing but positive things to talk about his journey. And I get to do something I've never, ever done in my life. I get to show you guys a slideshow on my vacation. I've always wanted to bore people to death with slideshows. And today I get maybe my one opportunity to do that. Mark's not going to be entirely happy with all of this because I did promise him I wouldn't use any likeness of him, but I took these pictures before I said that. So does that make it a lie? So I'm going to show you a slideshow, and I'm not going to approach this journey, if you will, this vacation as we normally would in church, because here's what normally happens in church when we start talking about journeys and the path that God set you on, is we do this. We say, well, just deal with it. God has a bigger plan. Don't worry about it. Just endure it. Don't question it. Just do what God wants you to do. Well, today we're going to question every step of the way, because I believe that in those questions, it helps us to see the positive that lies behind them. So we're going to start our slideshow here. And the first question that we come up with is, why must I wait so long? Now, most of us as Christians know that God is going to have something for us to do. Most of us know that there's going to be this difficult path ahead of us, or at least I hope you do. I hope you do. But some of us are frustrated and impatient to begin. This is my son Mark out front of the DMV in Fort Morgan. You see, on the Monday morning that we left, Mark wanted to get his driver's permit so that he could drive along the way. We also heard that the DMV in Fort Morgan fills up very quickly. So we got there at 6:30. They open at 8. I pulled out my lawn chair. Mark sat on the sidewalk, and we waited for it to open. But when we start talking about our personal journey, when we see people around us moving, when we see people that we know that are achieving great things for God, we get impatient. And we think that, as Christians, shouldn't we be moving already? Shouldn't we be running the race? Well, let me tell you about Paul. Paul was 50 years old when he was converted on that road to Damascus. 50 years. Now, he was converted on the road, and you would think, okay, now I'll get started. But it wasn't until 7 years later that he actually went on his first missionary journey. Paul waited 57 years to begin God's journey. Now, some of us out there are younger than 57, and we're thinking, well, man, my life's almost over. You still got time. But why does God make us wait so long? And I think the answer to that question is somewhat obvious. It's because we're not ready. And if it's not us that's not ready, it's the circumstances that aren't ready. Why does God want you to wait? Just wait. Just be patient. Because God is putting people and things into place so that when He urges you to move, when He gives you that vision, you and everything around you is ready for your action. Mark, before we got to this point, had waiting to do. He had to wait till he was 15 years old. He had to wait till he went through driver's education. He had to wait till he passed his test. And he had to wait till Dad was brave enough. That's a lot of waiting. But then when we're at the DMV, finally it's time. The waiting is over. Things are in place. People are in place. So now we can begin to move, right? This is usually the first question we ask when God finally tells us where we're going. Think about this in a larger context. I know no one who wants to be in Nebraska. But think about it in a bigger context. We waited, we prepared, we studied, we are who we are, and finally God gives us this vision. This is where I want you to go, this is what I want you to do. And the first question that comes to us, do I have to go there? That's really not where I thought you were going to send me, God. I had different plans. Paul, think about Paul. He's a Roman citizen. He's educated. He's sophisticated. God calls him to go all over the known earth at the time. To lands that hate Romans, to lands that hate Christians, to uncivilized countries. He had to ride on stinky boats and on the back of fly-infested mules. Do I really have to go there, God? If you would have talked to me 15 years ago and said that you'd be preaching, I would have taken you to the ER for a brain scan. That was not my plan. I was going to be a Marine. I was going to kill some commies for my mommy and carry guns, retire. But we have to be open to where God wants us to go. God's not a travel agent. We don't dial up Expedia.com and tell God where we're going to go. God makes those decisions. So we've waited until it was time. We've questioned where God wants us to go. And then the next question comes up. How will I get there? This is Mark behind the wheel. And it's funny because I texted Cheryl this message. He had just gotten behind the wheel. And I texted this to Cheryl and she said, shouldn't he be watching the road? And yeah, the answer to that, yeah. He should be. Totally agreed. I didn't even think about that. I'm like, smile. And how will I get there? Here's what happens. Let me, with all respect, tell you what happens when we finally do get a word from God. We're pretty self-sufficient people, most of us out there, especially from this type of community. We're go-getters. And so if there's something in front of you that you want, I know for a fact that nearly everyone out there will go and get it. You will find a way to make it happen. If it's a new job, you'll find a way to buy new clothes. You'll find a way to be relevant during the interview. If it's a girl or a guy, you'll find a way to attract them. If it's a new house, you'll sell everything you own, pawn, whatever you got to do, borrow money. You will find a way to make material things in this world happen. But here's what happens when God lays this plan, go to Nebraska, that you don't want any part of in front of you. You suddenly start saying, hey, God, what are you going to do to get me there? Suddenly, I mean, we've been the strong person in life. We've been able to accomplish all things on a personal level. But when God puts this huge, grandiose vision in front of us, suddenly we become helpless. Why is it that we'll fight so hard to get a car or a house or a boat or a wife? There's another question, why? But when it comes to something God wants us to do, we end up asking God, how are you going to get me there? Paul, you think about Paul's journeys. How did Paul get to where God wanted him to do? Well, Paul crawled at times. Paul walked at times. Paul ran at times. Paul was drugged by his hair at times. Paul went through prison, through ship, on mule. And I'm sure there's a number of other ways Paul got places. How did Paul get to where God wanted him to go? By fighting and scratching the entire way. If you want to achieve this journey that God is going to give you the vision for or has, you have to be willing to put in your effort. Remember, God works through us. God is not going to lift you up and take you from point A to point B and say, wow, look what you've done. Because you haven't done it. And it's the journey that builds us. It's the journey that strengthens us. It's the struggles that change us. And that kind of brings us to our next question. Why must this journey cost so much? This is a toll booth somewhere in Indiana, Illinois, something like that. I don't remember where it was, but if you don't know, I-80 turns into a toll road. Now, Mark and I noticed something really peculiar about the fact that as soon as the road became a toll road, it got better. There weren't as many potholes. It was smoother in general. There was a lot of construction, but I mean, let's look on the positive side. That means they're making the road better, right? There was a lot of construction, but it was smoother. It was better, and they don't have rest areas like we do in Colorado. I forget. Do you remember what they're called, Mark? It's kind of like you're going down Indianapolis, and there's like a pit road. All you have to do is veer off the interstate just a little ways, and they have these rest stops, we'll call them. But these rest stops are awesome because in these rest stops, there's restaurants, there's stores, there's arcades, there's places to sit, there's huge parks. And they have these like every 20 miles. This is cool. And so the question becomes, why must this journey cost so much? It's because you're getting good things along the way. Why is it so difficult? Once you start moving for God, once you've decided to take up your own impetus to move forward, why do all these things drop in your way? Because God still sees there's some refining to be done in you. You know, He got you started, He got you moving, and then He saw a flaw. You guys build tractors. You put them together, you tighten every bolt, you paint everything, and you take them out and you run them, and what happens? You leave a line loose. You build a Chevy pickup truck and it don't run. It's the same way. We get started on the journey and God says, oh, well, wait a minute. There's a flaw that we didn't take care of. So He makes it difficult for you to move ahead. And it's to refine you, to make you better. So we've waited. We've questioned where we're going. We've taken up our own strength to start moving. And now we're starting to get a little costly effects along the way, which leads us to despair. Despair. This is a picture of the house I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my life in a little town called Dew Shore, Pennsylvania. Now, look at it because it's kind of run down. It ain't got a whole lot going on for it. But I want to tell you that it's not the way I remember it. I had told Mark stories about, off to which would be your left, there's a hill there. And we used to sled down that hill. And when I was a kid, I remember that hill being really, really steep. I mean, really steep. I remember the house being taller. We used to toss G.I. Joe men and my sister's toys off the second story. I remember that. We used to play on that deck, and I remember the deck was so high I was afraid to go out on the deck. There was a creek. You can't see, actually we're standing on the bridge. Maybe you can see the edge of it. There was a creek that I remember being huge with fish in it. It's about this wide. Why can't you go home? Because you're not the same person you want to be, or the same person that you were. We get in these moments of despair on the journey, and we lie to ourselves. First of all, we say, I'm going to go back home, Lord, and I'm going to regroup. No way, you don't regroup, you just quit. You just get home and you quit. I look at that house now and it's not anything like I remember it being. It hasn't changed so much. It's me that's changed. And that's why we can't go back once we start the journey. Because you're not the same person you used to be. Whether you realize it or not, you have grown. You have changed. You have become more than you were. So don't ever give up. Because when you get back home, you're not going to like it. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be angry. It's not going to give you the enjoyment that it once did. All right, so can't go home again. We keep moving down the highway. Next slide. This is what happens if we persevere. In every one of our lives, we come to a point on our journey where we look back and go, wow, who knew life could be this great? This is a picture of where Mark and I spent almost 2 weeks. Now, it doesn't look like much, but for two introverts who really don't like a lot of company all the time, this was heaven. My sister and her husband own different plots of land, and their house is up on a hill, and about a half a mile away you go down into this creek bed. You have to pretty much four-wheel across it. And then you come to this clearing, and there's a big pavilion there where they have barbecues, and then just over the hill, they put up this camper trailer. Now, we didn't have running water. We had a porta potty, but that's all right. But we had air conditioning, we had electricity, and this is where we spent every morning and every night. And it really came to be a place of peace for us. We would get up in the morning and we would cook on the camp stove, eggs and bacon and hot dogs and whatever, Spam, I think, whatever, all that good stuff that men eat, But I don't think, when my sister told me, hey, we're going to have this camper trailer, I never envisioned that it would be that great. Paul, after all these years of struggle, still has the faith to say, I count myself lucky. I count myself lucky for everything I went through. And James says, brothers and sisters, every time adversity comes your way, rejoice, because it produces perseverance. If you can just continue to make it through the difficult times and stay with the journey, I promise you that there's a day that you're going to look back and say, wow, who knew that my life could be this great? Just one more slide for you. One more slide. I know slideshows, they get boring. This is the odometer when we got to Pennsylvania. I think it reads 1,661 miles. By the time we got back, we had covered over 3,700 miles. But when we got to Pennsylvania, there was this sigh of relief. We went right to the trailer before we went to my sister's, and we unloaded our stuff, and we're like, whew, we're here. And for just a moment, we lied to ourselves and said, our journey's over. And then for about the next week and a half, we did what we did, and we enjoyed our time there. But it suddenly came to be known to us that our journey wasn't over. That we had to drive back. And that wasn't as fun as going. But so inevitably on our journeys, we ask God, when is this going to be over? We get to this point, we make it through this really, really difficult time, and we say, if I can just make it till Tuesday, or if I can just make it through this surgery, or if I can just make it through my, my marriage, or until the house is paid off, or whatever it is. We lie to ourselves, and we cut life down into these shorter journeys, and we think that that's going to be the last one. I don't care if you're 2 or 102, your journey never stops. And here's something that I promise you, that if you think your journey stops and you absolutely dig your heels in and refuse to move, then you're getting left behind. Because the world doesn't stop spinning and God's plan doesn't stop unfolding. Your journey will continue until the very day that you sit before God in His throne room. Paul, after 25 years of service, ends up in a Roman prison. You would think, Paul, I'm sure is saying to himself, God, when is this ever going to end? He gets out of the Roman prison, the next thing you know, he goes off on another journey. If you're going to be relevant, if you're going to be useful in God's kingdom, your journey will never stop. You'll have rest stops along the way, moments to catch your breath, to regroup. But eventually God's going to come and this whole process is going to start over. That's my slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Now, your job's not over though, because I've kind of made this vow that I'm going to make life difficult on you guys, and I'm going to make you guys do a little work each week. So here's your work right now. On the back of your bulletin, you'll see that there's 10 questions we ask ourselves with traveling. I didn't give you 10. I gave you 6 or 7, I think it was. What I want you to do right now, though, is I'm going to give you a few moments in just a minute, and I want you to talk amongst yourselves. And I want you to think about your best vacation moment, if you want to relate this to a vacation. Or if you're brave and you can relate it to your life's journey, think about one of your worst or best life moments. And I want you to share that with somebody. You see, if we can't make the sermon relative, then nothing's really been accomplished today. So take a few minutes, talk to one another. Best vacation moment, worst vacation moment, best life moment, worst life moment. And then we'll come back together and finish with the song. Go ahead.